pay attention. And we find that it works better and allows for folks to have casual conversation over lunch, and then we're not pressed through the lunch hour. So I would like to welcome back. Everybody knows Phil Isenberg, but just for those who are not familiar with him or you've not seen him as often as some of us, Phil's the former mayor of Sacramento, and there is no truth to the rumor that he actually has the former governor's rowboat to get to work in case of the flood we just heard about. He had a distinguished career in the state legislature, and for many years has been involved in the Delta Vision process. Today he is now chairing the Delta Stewardship Council, and so we are very privileged to have back our Delta expert. And he's got a lot of red in that report. So, ladies and gentlemen, Phil Isenberg. Thank you.
Folks, if you don't mind, I'd rather sit here. I'm not using a slideshow, and it just seems more sensible to do it a little bit informally, if you don't mind. Also, thank you for letting me speak after Dr. Jones. Her presentations have the benefit of being simply stated, clear, and scary. And that is so remarkably refreshing in public policy and government talk that I commend to you that. I would also recommend you haul her back for a discussion of USGS findings on underground water supply statewide, which even made me speechless for a minute or so when we heard it at a council meeting. They are doing terrific work, and they've managed to produce some graphic representations of their scientific study that aid in public policy development in a way that a lot of the scientific information does not. So, anyway, just a couple of things. It's my hope to spend most of the time with questions, so I didn't bring reading papers and slides and all that kind of stuff. I simply want to tell you what we're doing. We followed this. People followed, staff followed, some of you have testified once or many more times, and we are toward the end of a process that started in April of 2010, last year. The 2009 water bill package of 5 pieces of legislation did a bunch of things, but they created a Delta Stewardship Council. They established new state policy involving water and Delta policy that we're supposed to fiddle around with, and we've been working diligently to keep the timeline that was given to us by the legislation. And I'm just going to skim over the superficial stuff, and then we'll come back to big questions where you're most likely to direct attention. The legislation did a bunch of things that frankly surprised me. I was a pessimist. I predicted the chance of the legislature passing a bill package, let alone a significant bill package, was somewhere between 0 and 10% when I was feeling happy. So don't pay much attention to what I say on predictions. They set up a system and adopted in state law what has become, in reference now, as the co-equal goals for water and Delta policy in California. And I want to tell you, as a recovering politician of 25 years in elected office, my experience was always with legislation or ordinances at the local level where we promised everything to everyone, we mentioned everybody's interests at great length, and we pretended that that was a policy declaration with choices being made. Au contraire, that was simply listening to every squeaky wheel around, giving them a place on the list of priorities, and I guess the rule is pretty clear. If everything is equally important, then nothing is important. So in this water resource world, the legislature adopted a definition of co-equal goals. It's short, I'm going to read it to you, but I think it's important. Co-equal goals mean 2 goals of providing a more reliable water supply for California and protecting, restoring, and enhancing the Delta ecosystem, period. The co-equal goals shall be achieved in a manner that protects and enhances the unique cultural, recreational, natural resources, and agricultural values of the Delta as it evolved in place. John Laird, our and at least for the last 50 years, it has not. And so the co-equal goals became a slightly different way of talking about the water puzzle. They grew out of Governor Schwarzenegger's Bell Division Task Force, which I chaired. We came up with a kind of notion of co-equal, but it's no surprise that demand for use of water and impact on ecosystem is been intersecting for many decades and will to come. The declaring of co-equal suggests perhaps a different approach, and I keep saying to myself that every time I hear somebody testify, they inch forward on the co-equal goals and then revert to position all in the same sentence without much surprise. Anyway, they established co-equal goals, and they said that co-equal goals should drive and lead to a legally enforceable Delta plan. They told us to develop, adopt, and commence implementation no later than January 1st, 2012. Now, this planning document will have regulatory elements in it. I think it's 14 by count, and I don't know, 58 or 60 recommendations, which are non-regulatory. But it is very much, it's partially likened to a community general plan, county general plan, city general plan. It is not a project plan. Project plans are separate. But we were told to develop that plan and commence to implement it. The legislation set up what are called covered actions. Covered actions by state or local agencies as defined must be consistent with the Delta plan. Okay? In addition, and much to folks' surprise, the Stewardship Council is given a potential appellate role with regard to the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. The legislation says if it meets all the test of laws and is adopted, it will be incorporated in the Delta Plan. And the last step on that road, before it gets to us, is a decision by the Department of Fish and Game that the BDCP has met the requirements of state law, HCP, all the other stuff that goes with it. There's a gold-plated standard pretty much on the BDCP process on the environmental view. And in addition, the legislative package attached a whole bunch of additional conditions and requirements as well. That decision of the Department of Fish and Game may be appealed to the council. And we have spent a considerable amount of our time dealing with interested parties, including your representatives, who want us to say in advance what we'll do when BDCP, which hasn't been finished and won't be for some time, comes before us. And I keep saying, you want us to tell you what we'll do before we know what you're proposing, and 2 years in advance, if not more, of the accumulation of evidence, and they say, yeah, we'd like to know that. So my friend Byron Buck, who's sitting over there, produces 8 million letters every week, or words every week. But basically, that's the framework we're operating. A couple other things the legislation did. It increased the role that we're required to give to science. And it's a common kind of statutory technique now, on the federal level or on state levels, to mandate that best available science be used, particularly when you're facing a sticky political decision. Whatever the engineering and the science is, the fights are sticky. And so the legislation made it clear that our decision, the Delta Plan, should be based on the best available science. And as you know, from your own experience in water districts and in local government, everyone who's in favor of what you want to do believes that you have enough information to proceed and you should stop this endless study. Everyone who's opposed to it wants you to study until the perfect answer is found. And so the legislation is increasingly around America using the phrase best available science. I think it's a remarkably effective tool. I think it's a useful tool. It's one that plays in BDCP, but at least in statutory terms, helps us understand that decisions have to be made in society, and you cannot wait for an ultimate answer because no ultimate answer exists. But at the same time, scientists are not simply troublesome intermeddlers who refuse to see the wisdom of the ideas and policies we put on the regional boards, and we don't carve into that. Then the last is, the legislation said that the state interests are the co-equal goal in reducing risk to life, property, and state interests in the Delta. And that is an illustration of some interesting choices. Now, I wouldn't argue to you all the legislators might have exhaustively understood it, but state interests in the Delta, there are some, the existing state water conveyance system, the highway system. But it is a discussion that is remarkably complex, and it's one that troubles water contractors, because to the extent state interest relates to a current or future water export system, a threat to that state interest may cause an assessment on water contractors to help mitigate the risk. And the politician in me believes that policy is fine. We spend a lot of time arguing about policy, but behind every policy is money. Who pays, how much, when, and for what. So that's what we're going to do. We're just going absolutely nuts. By Monday, we will post the 5th draft Delta plan. That is the plan that will be circulated for the 45-day secret comment period. The EIR will go with it. Based on all the things we've gotten before, I can't remember. We received probably 5,000 or 6,000 communications, and our experts are trying to tally up all the comments. And of course, every letter has 300 comments in different ways. So we'll probably get 10,000 or 12,000 comments from roughly 150 or 200 groups or individuals, maybe even more. We return in September for another review and an editing consistent with law of the process. We do that again in October, and in November we're slated to adopt the final Delta plan and EIR document. That date to achieve the statutory enforcement date is necessary because this is also parts of the Delta plan are under the State Administrative Procedures Act, because the regulatory issues require their own evaluation. Endlessly complex, impossibly short time frame, and I have a goal. I want to be the only governmental agency in history to actually comply with a timely statute. That is my goal. God knows I hedge a little bit occasionally, but not much. The issues are remarkably similar. The political sides are remarkably similar. But what's going on? A couple of things before we start answering some questions. And many of you have heard me before, and I hate to bore you about going through. Our water supply is under stress, and that stress is going to continue. And if you think it's not, this is statewide. We can only speak statewide. I mean, the council is a statewide entity. There are unique differences between the boards. But a stress on the statewide water supply in general terms will inevitably mean impacts to everyone, no matter how well situated on water supplies. Our high water flows are more frequent. They're erratic, but they're more frequent. Below water years are more prevalent, but they're erratic. We can't predict. I mean, if it's hard enough for USGS to predict in Japan, get 30 seconds warning on an earthquake, the stuff about atmospheric rivers, which I shied away from when I first heard it about 6 months ago, because it sounded like another term that didn't imply stuff that I understood very well, is a truly sobering illustration of how fragile our current water supply is. If for no other reason, we either receive it or don't in very short periods of time, shorter than anywhere else in the nation, which means you can just get in big trouble. So, climate change appears to be a substantial cause of this, but who knows? You already know about the implications of temperature rise, which is going on, which is a change in the composition of our precipitation. More rain, less snow. Well, we signed endless water contracts based on old assumptions of weather patterns. Guess what? The systems, we build dams, you build dams where flood control is part of it. Well, what do you have to have? You have to have an empty dam. That's not consistent with water supply. I mean, we all understand why those multiple funding, multiple purpose things happen, but the commitments that we've made in the past based on old historic records are being altered by nature as we sit here, and the operational complications are deeply, deeply disturbing, I think, for everyone. And by the way, just a digression if I might. Is there anybody here not in the Met service area? There must be some. No? Yeah. Met did something that I still am absolutely flabbergasted that they actually pulled it off. And that's when the drought was at the height and you started to allocate reductions. That is so adult, so smart, and so tough. Governments and politicians like me, like I used to be, we fly from those issues because nobody likes them. That was the smartest, it was a management tool. How better to capture attention? It's what Dr. Jones was talking about on risk. How better to capture attention than to say, look, we're planning ahead to the future. If we lose this much water for whatever the reason, here's how the allocations go. Well, because it's politically unpopular. People get angry about it. But it was the smartest planning move, in my judgment, that you could have made, and probably ought to be mandated on everybody in the state of California, and in part, that's one of the things we're running into. But our water supply is relatively finite. Supply is not growing, no of that. The reliability of the state water project is declining. No surprise. Big infrastructures, essentially constructed 40 or 50 years ago, always lose efficiency. And if you have overall demand growing at the same time, it should shock absolutely no one that a fixed supply cannot automatically satisfy growing demand without figuring things out. The economy in California, even in the recession, is still growing. The overall use of water is still growing, but per capita use has started to drop a bit, which is terrific. But it doesn't solve the problem. No single thing solves the problem, because there are many problems, not one. One of the big imponderables out there is oversubscribed groundwater. Thank God, after all the fights you went through in the litigation, you have largely, I guess, overwhelmingly adjudicated basins in Southern California, unlike most of the rest of the state, which does not. That has problems for people, and it causes great discomfort, but you become better capable of managing your resources because of it, and the rest of the state isn't anywhere close. I'll talk about that in a bit more. For me, this whole resource stuff sounds very much like the state budget and the national budget. There are wants and needs, and there's supply. And some business guys keep telling me, well, talk about supply and demand, and I think that's not a bad way to think about this issue. We built up a water system in California based on the assumption of many years, where California is a great exception. It was endless. Bountiful nature, designed for human uses, and so we just promised and promised and promised. The difficulty is society also wishes to have protected environments. This morning, Public Policy Institute of California released another one of their polls. This was on environmental issues, and most of the attention was a growing resistance to nuclear power and all the stuff you'd expect. But the public of California and America seems to be convinced that you can actually achieve political goals. They leave it to all of you and people like me to figure out how to do it, but that's the truth. But the Delta is in deep trouble. It's in deep trouble not just by water from water exports, but from upstream water users. All the sanctimonious northern Californians who still love to call you the great octopus of the old battle. And I've decided that my summary for the water dilemma in California is that famous Walt Kelly cartoon from the Pogo comic strip of your youth. We have met the enemy, and he is us. It is true. Our society causes problems that are either inevitable or unavoidable, and hopefully some reversible. And until we solve the dilemma of how to actually improve the Delta ecosystem, not simply to agree to spend money in the hopes that that might improve it, It's going to be hard to imagine that an unreliable ecosystem can support a totally reliable water supply system. So I want to leave you with, before we get to detailed questions, with my favorite list of how to create commotion and arguments. And I call them 5 vexing questions. And they're ones that we dabble at, we just dabble at it, but these are ones that frankly nobody wants to take on because they're mean enough, therefore we should talk about it. On water reliability, should the state of California guarantee to deliver more water on average than nature provides? If not, why do we sign water contracts that on their face appear to provide just that? Related question. How can California's water delivery system be made more reliable if we do not keep track of the full amount of existing water rights and have no idea of the amount of water that's needed to satisfy things like area of origin laws? How do we? You're running a water system, and somebody could walk in tomorrow and say, I demand 20% of all the water. Well, you'd probably like to know about that in advance. Build ecosystem, or conservation. Article of faith, conservation, system efficiency is a big part of the future of the water supply of California. Urban users now required to reduce their use by 20% by the year 20. I understand all the fight. You guys are going to, everyone says they're currently doing it anyway, so nothing else must be done. But look, the point is, it's the first time in law that a numerical reduction goal has been set and made legally enforceable, except for agriculture. And how can you expect that to continue forever in the future? We'll talk about political difficulties of all these in a minute. The Delta ecosystem. The Delta Reform Act, statute of 2009 says the goal is protecting, restoring, and enhancing the Delta ecosystem. Can the state of California guarantee that every species in the Delta or anywhere will be restored to some numerical level? If not, what kind of restoration is necessary? Those are not questions. By the way, I've tried to make questions that will offend everybody in the water supply as I can, because the reality is it's those mutually difficult questions that's going to get us out of this puzzle, not simply asking our opponents questions they're embarrassed by. Just as important, how do we get out of the mess that the species-by-species, litigation-driven, court decision, operational interruption stuff has gotten us to some new kind of decision? I have a point. Everyone's in favor of a new decision for someone else, but they want to control who makes the decision so their interests are protected. Underground water. Look, sure, the Tulare Basin is the big, the Willow and the underground stuff. The aquifers has been drawn down for over 100 years. USGS studies are quite remarkable on this. In a vacuum, it's drawn down by 1 million acre feet, 1 million to 4 million acre feet. There's a lot of water there. But here's a question. If communities who are currently using their underground water either pollute it or overdraw it, or it's just too expensive for them to get to, are they automatically entitled to replacement surface water? And if so, who gives up some of their share so they get it? This has to do with the notion of counting. If you can't measure something, you can't plan. You can assume things, but you have to count. And last point that there is no answer to. If the citizens of California and America have exhausted their willingness to pay taxes or fees for much of anything, how do we expect to achieve any social end in the state of California? Now, those are the perplexing questions which naturally you have an answer for, which is why I was pleased to come down. And so why don't I stop pontificating and let you ask questions about the Delta plan and the details, if that's okay.
That would be great.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I was going to ask you a question. You kept on saying improving the ecosystem and protecting and restoring the ecosystem. How can you do that if you don't know the boundaries of the ecosystem? The ecosystem keeps on changing all the time, and if you don't know the boundaries, how can you mitigate something and figure out what you need to do to mitigate this, because, like I said, the goalposts, they keep on changing.
You have a distressing habit, I suspect, of asking questions like that. The arrogance of humankind is to believe we can put arbitrary boundaries on land or water or anything else, and that somehow people pay attention to them, or species pay attention to them. They do not, of course. But we alter landscapes with considerable skill and talent, and we restore landscapes with great difficulty and imperfect solutions. The legislation also calls for adaptive management, and we've given a shot in the Delta plan to try to give some definition. You know, few states have actually have limited statutory definition. California does not. We've tried to flesh out that. But adaptive management, whether it's a water supply or an ecosystem, is ultimately an ongoing measuring, evaluating, changing, planning, measuring, evaluating, changing, planning. There is no one-time solution to an ecosystem or a water supply system. 50 years from now, a group like this will be sitting in a room like this, and somebody like me is going to be explaining the state's latest effort to deal with the water problems in California. That's been the history of the state. That will be the history of the state. We have a statutory delta. And the jurisdiction of the Delta plan the delta itself is defined in statute, is the statutory delta plus the Sioux Marsh. That gives us a base. But of course, you can't achieve a reliable water supply for California, let alone a delta ecosystem, if you close your eyes to the fact that upstream users are preventing water that used to reach the delta from reaching the delta. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out. So you try to bring it all together. No perfect solution. I wish I had a perfect solution. But you know, I've been forced to read a lot of scientific journals and articles of late, and they have decided, they've got a new phrase, they call problems wicked problems, which is not a bad way to describe them, because they're big, mean, ugly, unclear, imprecise, and everybody in society knows exactly what should be done as long as somebody else pays the cost. And the scientists, of course, are asked to opine from on high, and they say, well, how the hell are we supposed to say that with a 99% guarantee, if you do this, something will happen? We hope it will. Nature doesn't operate that way. It responds differently. Conversations with our Dutch colleagues, both management, ecosystem, and engineers, are always quite remarkable, because they are the closest Western thing to a Great Wall of China engineer style. They are monumental. They talk about flood protection. Their current urban 10,000-year flood protection, a level so high we can't even say the words in California. They're going to go to 100,000-year flood protection for some of their groups. I mean, it's unbelievable. So we're moving slowly and imperfectly to try to address those questions. Hopefully the Delta Plan becomes a touchstone. But the statute said we have to review the Delta Plan and amend it at least every 5 years and more often if needed. And that becomes a very useful tool. The other thing I didn't mention is the legislation did a lot of things, but it didn't wipe out 199 existing federal, state, and local governments with some statutory duties in the Delta. Didn't do that. We don't do that anymore. But for state agencies in particular, and hopefully local agencies, a relatively clear Delta plan within a policy construct becomes a touchstone that people work through on individualized projects. I'm convinced that most of the projects that most people talk about are either consistent with the Delta plan in whatever form it would take, or with minor adjustments might be. But the notion that all of us have to think about the co-equal goals is different. I mean, I was a mayor at the start of the environmental impact report, and we had very clear, here's the project we wanted. We got to do this long, boring paper full of environmental impact report, and at the end of it, we have to ask how much money we have to give to the opponents of the project to make them go away. Boy, have those days disappeared. But anyway, it is a quite interesting process. By the way, Byron, should I tell him? This is, I've got to tell the truth. So this is, Byron was one of the most active participants in the stakeholders group on Delta Vision, the process before this one, the advisory group to Governor Schwarzenegger. And I cranked up my own idea of how to do it. And Byron and Gary Locker from the Institute, strong, good environmental, smart guy, they both stood up and said, we're not sure about this, but you're about to do something really stupid. That's, the guys talked that way, which was a lot of fun. And so, Mr. Chairman, would you just lay your issue aside? We'll think about an approach. And they came back at least with a construct. Why don't you develop a plan and require consistency determinations for that plan? Now, we have fights about what that means, but that approach, in fact, it was doable, it was attractive, and it's probably a better way to proceed than the more heavy-handed approach I was doing. Yes, sir.
I represent many of the farmers here in Southern California. The farmers, as you all know, are slowly being regulated out of the state. In the early drafts of the plan, we began to see that it looked like the council was setting up to become a regulatory agency, and I'm hoping that
We do have regulatory.
still our fears that that's not
No,
the
we
case.
do have regulatory authority. I'm not telling you it's
Can you
massive.
tell us about it?
Yeah, sure. The council has covered action authority, that is, state and local agencies that meet the test of law and covered actions are required to come before the council to determine consistency. So let me just read you the section. Here's what a covered action is under statute. Covered action means a plan, a program, or a project that meets all of the following conditions. One, will occur in whole or in part within the boundaries of the Delta or the Suisun Marsh. Two, will be carried out, approved, or funded by the state or local public agency. Three, is covered by one or more provisions of the Delta Plan. Four, will have a significant impact on achievement of one or both of the co-equal goals, or the implementation of government-sponsored flood control programs to reduce risks to people, property, and state interests in the Delta. Now, there are exclusions in statute. So, the exclusions are as follows. A regulatory action of a state agency is excluded, not covered action. Routine maintenance and operations of the state water project of the CVP is excluded. There's a great argument about what routine maintenance and operations mean. Put that aside. Regional transportation plans are not ones we fiddle around with. Metropolitan Planning Organizations Act. This was the Sacramento Area Council of Government came in and got a whole long paragraph drafted by a former law associate of mine to exempt their activities, but their plan isn't going to be done before the Delta plan is, and so they want to be exempt from routine maintenance and operations of any facility located in whole or in part in the Delta that is owned or operated by a local public agency. And then a bunch of other exemptions for projects that have completed the process by time, date, certain or prior to the Delta plan being adopted. And then this one this shows that hope springs eternal. Based on the assumption that the Bay Delta Conservation Plan is going to be whipped into shape really fast, there's an exemption that says any project for which a notice of approval or determination is filed on or after the date of the final EDCP and before the Delta plan is adopted, potential interruption in the Delta water supply for up to 36 months. And, everyone says, well, we can't do that. Well, that's the same thing the Met Board of Directors faced when they said, why should we talk now about what we might have to do if we run out of water? Why don't we talk about it then, because the people will understand it? Well, because you can't plan for it. And we plan for a lot of, that is really controversial to many people. And we suggest that those standards apply on agricultural districts as well. That's one of the things your folks don't like. I think the thing they really don't like is the notion that we have a policy, that's a regulation that says, well, the transport of water through the delta or from the delta is covered action. Well, you can't do that. That might mean you might tell me no, or something I don't want to hear. How do you achieve the co-equal goals when the first one is water reliability for California if you cannot talk about the movement of water through the delta? Now, the upstream users, my neighbors and friends in Northern California have an even better position. They don't benefit by BDCP. They don't do anything that affects the delta. The fact that there might not be as much water going there now as there was 50 or 75 or 100 years ago ain't got nothing to do with them. And so leave us alone. There's a charming letter they filed with the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. I don't know, Ron, did you see the letter? It's a short letter, but it's basically not us. And as somebody who sat through the Pete Wilson budget years of great severity, I had a wall on my office of all the budget letters that I called the not me wall. Don't balance the budget on the back of, and then fill in the blank. And of course, everybody in California is about themselves and their interests. So those are the issues. I will give you my opinion. We'll fight about this a lot. I understand the lawyers are girding for litigation and all that. This is so far from a serious AB 32 regulatory format that I scratch my head with amazement of how much commotion it has generated for the little world in which we operate. But take a look at it. The new drafts will be out. We've got about 14 regulations, about 60 recommendations. We have all kinds of narrative on top of that and maps and charts to try to construct the equivalent of a regional plan or a city general plan. It's not exactly that, but it's close.
Yes. I'm so glad you're here. This is certainly not the first time. We've been here on many occasions. It's been very helpful.
We've been having a hotel in Riverside or San Bernardino. Where it was. Remember that?
Yes, indeed. Right. Well, let me ask you a question that I think is on the mind of many of the people in this room. Most of the people in this room are dependent upon one state contractor or another.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's been the consistent position of this organization and the state contractors that they're not just assuming there's going to be water supply reliability. They've been highly supportive of the restoration goals in the Delta as well. I'll differ with your take perhaps on the legislature. I was there during the sausage making, and my takeaway was that the legislature was looking to the Delta Stewardship Council to provide that wise man role that the Delta Stewardship or the Delta Commission, Visioning Commission that you had provided to get us as far as the discussion on the legislation. So they weren't capable of themselves of making all these choices. They early on decided you had to be first out of the box, the Delta Stewardship Council, to grapple as wise men with these very thorny issues. They kind of relied upon the water bond to address the traditional issues that they had to satisfy themselves with. But in the end, they're expecting the wise men to come up with a plan that satisfies the co-equal goals. So my question is this, for the people in this audience who are hoping that the plan will provide for support for a reliable water supply defined by Byron Buck as others as average, key criteria, supplies consistent with what we've been receiving in the
1 million acre feet of water every year. You didn't say anything, I just said promote. Our potential appellate role is somewhat constrained. Because if we start to prejudge issues, it is hard to imagine like size and capacity. Nobody said to us build a facility. That's what BDCP's done. That's why the language is there. When BDCP is completed, it will be incorporated in the plan, save only for that lingering question, does it meet the requirements of law as determined by the Department of Fish and Game, which may be appealed to the council. Doesn't mean we can change BDCP. Ron, you've heard me say this, we did it in television for Governor Schwarzenegger. We said in general we thought there that a dual conveyance was likely the option of choice that would make the most sense. Hard to imagine the next 90 years, and our plan looks out to the year 2100, where exports from the Delta in some fashion do not continue. But at the same time, it's hard not to say decreased reliance in the statute is just a hope. It's not a statute. It is a statute. It isn't a legislative finding. It's a statutory provision. And much like the Colorado dispute, what we're really doing is trying to rationalize the process over time with the interested parties. That's why I said the vexing questions. Count the demands against the water supply in California, quantify them. Now, I understand the political controversy in quantifying, particularly pre-1914 rights, but how do you develop a reliable water system if you do not know what other demands exist that might have priority to the ones you seek to serve? How do you do that? Tell me how you do that. If the word is reliability, then you have to have a closer approximation of predictability.
Well, I think what many people here are expecting is that engineering efficiency and creative ways of moving water, balanced with the best science, is the hope with adaptive management. So my question really is, do you foresee that this plan and the wise men, the Council of Wise Men, can find a way to agree that there are such solutions?
Yeah, but, I mean, I shouldn't do this. Well, I should do this. I try to read as much as I can and understand it. And Met has done a wonderful job on reducing per capita use. And you must be going, for those of you on the Met, in the Met structure, must be going through the anguish of what do we do now? The drought's over, it was really wet year, we know what people will do over time, they'll start backsliding, the use will go up. How do you deal with that? But, I also read the Met planning documents on the amount of water you want from the Delta, and you want an increase in water from the Delta. And you want it in wet years as well, in dry years as well as the current. I mean, I looked at the projections through 2035 on water demand. Well, maybe, but there are other people who use Delta water who also have their own projections. And the question is, this is one of the great, but the environmentalists hesitate and pause and are deeply discomforted when I say we can't, the notion of promising survival of every state. Government can say things like that, but how do we guarantee it? How do you guarantee a reliability level in measurable terms for water delivery when you can't even say what's the total demand legally, presently, against the system? I mean, the hoot, some of you may have seen it because some local districts participated, but the South Sutter Water Authority was studying the Bear River. They want to transfer some water. They want to build a dam up there and transfer. It's not water they're using. It's water they think they have a right to, but they don't have a water contract. They don't have a water right. They have an unqualified pre-1914 position that they believe entitles them to take water, not to apply on the 30 or 40,000 acres within their jurisdiction, but to sell to somebody else. Woo! I mean, I'm a long way from law school on the water courses, but I thought there was usually a rule that riparian and others who use water related to property, the water had to benefit that property, not simply produce more money for the owner of the property. Now, maybe I'm wrong. That's how we're doing this in bits and pieces. So, is there a miracle solution out there? No. We cannot pass a law and make it rain on a regular basis each and every year indefinitely into the future. We cannot pass a law. You could repeal the Clean Water Act federally and the Endangered Species Act and the State Clean Water Act and the State Endangered Species Act, and you arguably would be in a better position. 35 years later, I predict to you that would turn out to be mostly an illusion, but that's just my call. And I think, by the way, much of this next year leading to the presidential election in 2012 will be a return to the old battles, waiting for, the Republican president will take over the Senate. This won't be like George Bush. This will be the good time when we really wipe out all these things. I mean, maybe it'll happen. I doubt it. maybe. So, you know, a fairly direct, focused, honest discussion in public would be useful, as opposed to the honest discussions which occur in private a lot.
Did I understand you right? You just said that we here in Southern California have no right
No,
to
that isn't
water
what-
from Northern California.
no, I didn't say that at all.
Okay.
There are undoubtedly water right holders down here. There are pre-1914 water rights and all of that, and there are water contracts. But there are, I mean, the Supreme Law, if you look at the Supreme Law of California, it is the Constitution of the State of California. That's why referencing the Public Trust Doctrine and Article 10 of the Constitution on beneficial, reasonable use, no wasting, disturbs people. But that is the Supreme Law of the State of California. Contracts have great legal significance. Great legal significance. They're not constitutional. Now, the legislature cannot easily interfere with contracts, but it can, as other states have done, can require quantification. Tell us how much you're supposed to have. What are you demanding? That's very unpopular for people who would prefer to have an unquantified abstract demand. But for water managers, you deal with variability. We think we have a reasonable probability of getting this. We have a somewhat smaller probability of getting a little extra, and so on. But in the real world, that translates as we're not getting all the water we were promised and we're paying for. Well, the fastest way to solve that problem is don't hedge on the future for water you don't think is going to be there.
So reliability then is on a sliding scale.
I'm sorry.
Reliability then is on a sliding scale.
There's no common definition of water reliability in California. And if you really want to get frustrated, and you've read enough reports from governmental agencies, take a look at the 4 Department of Water Resources State Water Project reliability reports issued since they settled the court judgment in 2000. I've read all 4. That is punishment for your sins. It is one of the more insightful. It is almost impossible to determine, because they always have 35 scenarios, what it is that's happening until you read the cover memo from every director of water resources who said the reliability of our system is dropping. Dropping from species, dropping from lack of staff, dropping from impairments and non-repair in the system. There is no clear definition. I was, Byron, let me get back to number 2. Mr.
Rick Johnson with the Delta Issues Task Force, and we submitted a letter in response to the, I think, 4th draft regarding an alternative plan backed by a coalition.
That's the Agri Coalition, the Oculus League.
But the main concern we had at the time when we were going through all this is, I think, co-equal goals, as you say, you can talk about that. We're really concerned about whether we're going to have co-equal plans in the sense of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan moving forward. You already mentioned some of the time frames for the legislation and assumed that you've got to tell us more. It's not really clear to me that what you stated at the beginning was what we're doing with the Delta plan is similar to a general plan. I'm hearing an awful lot of details, a lot of assumptions about fixed supplies, a lot of basically reasons why we can't have a plan that addresses reliability and a plan that addresses the restoration of the Delta. That's what confuses most of us. Because we're not looking for the answers at this point in time.
Well,
We're looking for a plan and looking for an environmental document in both of these plans, your plan and the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, that's adequate under CEQA so that we can, it has all the alternatives in it so that wise people can make a decision. We see a lot of game playing trying to foreclose at this point in our beginning understanding of all the issues to foreclose some of the options and to narrow your choices. And I hear some of that coming out in what you say, there's a fixed supply, that there's, you have an appellate role and you can't comment. None of that makes sense to me if I'm doing a general plan for a city. I'm not going to sit down and say,
if you're the project proponent, all you have to do is complete BDCP. All you have to do under law is complete BDCP, get the federal clearance under the Endangered Species Act, the take permit, and convince the Department of Fish and Game it meets the tests of law. That's all you have to do. And the DECP started in 2006. That's 4 years before we were around.
The reason it was started is because it was going to fast track the process. It was hopelessly minor. And what we're seeing now is the games are still being played. Okay, we're going to delay the BDCP. Well, we want a co-equal plan.
We're not voting.
Well, you're moving ahead very fast, and you're going to get your plan in because it doesn't have the same level of environmental scrutiny as a plan, and you get that approved, and you say, oh, but now the detailed plan wasn't approved, so we don't have the same oversight. I'm very concerned that we don't have co-equal plan.
Byron, correct me if I'm wrong. The water contractors of California do not assert that the Bay Delta Conservation Plan itself will address all the problems of the Susu Marsh or the statutory delta. Now, maybe, I think that's the right statement. Okay. Which is why risk and flood assessment and flood risk and levee repairs are only tangential parts of BDCP. That is a big part of our duty. BDCP does not seek to have, as our mandate does, statewide conservation. Now, you might argue it's part of an overall package that would conserve water efficiency, but the contractors have been very careful not to read into what they view, this is my characterization, as the trap from all the Delta interests who say, well, here's my problem, my problem, my problem, problem. And because you want to build something big, you've got to solve my problem before you do anything else. But, and by the way, this is why you have a little trouble as contractors dealing with this, because the legislature did dump almost all of those things on us with statewide implications. But you also have reservations when we go beyond the Delta. And we have a mandate that goes beyond the Delta, statewide conservation. We have a mandate on flood control and risk reduction. So the question here is, it's easy to solve on BDCP completely. Now I urge you, we have encouraged the completion of BDCP. We actually, for a moment, hoped it would be completed before we finished the Delta plan, so we wouldn't have to go through this stuff. It looks like it's a ways away. Okay, that's fine. But what do you want us to do? We've got a statutory deadline to develop a plan. We do not attempt to prejudge BDCP, but you wish us to support and advance the declaration.
That's all I'm saying. I'm not asking for a prejudgment. I'm not asking for anything other than what we understand are the co-equal goals, that they're not in any of the things that are moving us forward under your mandate needs to move forward. It's more a concern that there's more focus on the obstacles.
Look, we read our statute, and there are objectives in the statute that are very important to us. There are, I think, 8 of them. They're alphabetized on there. But the fifth of the objectives that are inherent in the co-equal goals, the fifth of them, is improve the water conveyance system and expand statewide water storage. Okay, we support expansion of statewide water storage. It turns out not many people want to pay for it, but they want to have to expand it. And secondly, we support improving the Delta water conveyance system. Everybody wants to drag us into their tactical position for either BDCP or other things, and we are so far not enthusiastic about doing that. The environmental side has their own list of things we're supposed to say in advance. You should say that water exports have to be reduced 45% by the year 2012. Sorry, no. We do call for water flow standards to be set to the Delta by the Water Board, but we don't try to say what they are. All right.
Thanks, Phil. As you mentioned 4 times, I probably should have to speak for myself. I'm Byron Black, I'm the Contractors Water Agency, which is a new entity, kind of an umbrella.
He's one of the smart guys.
Yes. Well, thank you. One of my jobs is to follow Phil around, so I'm here. I've got a question, I think it goes to the heart of really the bigger part of the Delta debate, which really we need to distill it down to how much water do we need in the environment for ecosystem recovery, and how much is there for appropriation for a given year. That debate, that's kind of what it's about. So you talked a lot about the need to measure, you've argued that the system is over appropriated, and how can we talk about new water supply when we don't know who's using what and if we're over appropriated now? But the state board recently went through a water rights decision on a new water right application for the city of Davis and Woodland. And in that process, they determined, indeed, there is water available for appropriation, despite the fact they had their flow report out that in the abstract said we need to take away half the water supply and put it back in the Delta. Well, let me finish. They essentially said, no, that didn't account for balancing, it didn't account for water supply needs. And what they came up with was a permit that basically said, in wet years, in wet periods, there is water available, you can move it, you can use it. So they are essentially refuting this debate that we are over appropriated in all times and all places. With respect to the DSC, the water supply system in California, that plan is saying, we do not need a new water right. We're simply looking for access, better access to the water right we have now, and there's probably no estimation or no real belief we're going to get full entitlement to staff or anything like that. So we're merely talking about restoring that which we lost by fixing the conveyance system and getting out of the Endangered Species, or complying better with the Endangered Species Act requirements. So did the state board get it wrong? Is there not water for additional use? Is there not a balance point that allows these to use?
For those of you who don't follow, relatively tiny, what was it, 40,000 acre feet of water? Was it that much? 20,000 acre feet of water in the city of Davis and Woodland. Davis and Woodland, Davis, of course, being kind of like Santa Barbara in terms of environment, or Santa Cruz in terms of environmental consciousness, has gone a long way toward essentially polluting. The human development has polluted their groundwater source. They've never relied on surface water. And so as a result of a complicated deal, they joined up with the city of Woodland, both in Yolo County, and they approached the water board to take unappropriated water rights of a property owner, was agricultural, but now it's a land developer property owner, to the Sacramento River. The Sacramento River is one of the rivers that has not been quantified. They have not set flow standards for the Sacramento River. There are about 14 or 18 rivers and streams, mostly small in California, which are declared oversubscribed. The process of declaring that takes forever, takes a lot of money, very painful, very controversial. And so what's happening around the state by those upstream users and downstream users is a system that barely seems capable of supplying current demand as presently understood is dealing transaction by transaction with things where they do not count whether the river is oversubscribed for a whole host of reasons. And Byron, I think this is one of the really great problems. Now, when I was practicing law and representing clients, and I tell all my clients all these kinds of things, and they always say, well, tell us what we can do for your own best interest. And, I'd say things like, not that any other lawyer would. It's things like, well, try to get whatever you can on a piece of paper because you're better positioned in the argument for the future if you have a piece of paper that you don't, even if you don't think it's worth very much. Now, I don't want to say that many, or all, but a few of the water transactions are ones that give rise to concern. The water board, I understand, has a request for an additional 4 million acre feet of water rights, water permits, that they have been, kind of sitting on for a while. Should they hear them all? Should they grant them all? Should they grant them without regard to the reliability of the current water system? Now, there was a time when some of the water contractors actually wrote some mean letters about the Davis-Woodland application and then kind of backed off, right?
Yeah, essentially, the board did the right thing. They allowed the appropriation when there was water and when it didn't for other water uses.
Yeah.
And the problem,
I just